All right, let's talk about the real issue. What happened to the American middle class? At one time, America had the largest middle class in the world, and then in a matter of 2 decades, it shrank and shrank, and poof, it disappeared. What happened? So here's my take on that. Let's go back to the World War II. If you read the newspapers or if you go and check the news, you will hear a word statesmanship over and over again. All of these political leaders near the World War II, or most of them, were interested in doing bigger and better things than just winning the election. They wanted to create a better world. So Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, all these people took a lot of pride in calling themselves statesmen. America was no exception. American leaders also wanted to create a better world than the next guy or the other leaders in the world. Our leaders, the American leadership, came up with the idea of creating a benevolent nation. We wanted to create a benevolent nation. And that's why what you see is that we built Marshall Plan for Europe. Europe was our enemy in the World War II. But we created Marshall Plan and built their economy. Japan was our enemy. We went out of the way to create their economy. But internally, we did something totally fascinating, totally fantastic. Our leaders came up with this idea, what if we create a nation where everybody is prosperous? This was a unique idea and a very powerful idea. And towards that end, they created policies like GI Bill, where any war veteran could go for any length of education and the government paid for it. They came up with the idea of student loans and grants. Anybody could easily acquire a loan or a grant and take whatever education they wanted. They came up with the housing plan idea. They came up with the idea of financing the housing. You could borrow the money and buy a house. Everybody could own a house. These were very, very powerful ideas. But the most powerful idea, where America beat everybody else and left them into dust, was that they thought of increasing the income of the people who did manual labor. See, everybody else in the world was focused on increasing the income for the people who could read and write, or who were intellectual or educated. America was that one country where they thought of increasing the income of people who did manual work. Thus, we created a very large middle class. Everybody, the plumbers, the drivers, even the janitors, they started making very good money and they became middle class. Now, middle class has two very distinct qualities. They spend a lot of money and they pay a lot of taxes. So at one time we created a nation where 80 to 90% of the people were paying taxes. That was the middle class. We had created a golden goose. Our government had so much money they didn't know what to do with it. That's why how we created all these Marshall Plans and Japan economy. We created the strongest military force in the world. We sent the man to the moon. And we spent a lot of money on research. Another thing that happens is that when people don't have to struggle for survival, they become very creative. Your creative life begins where your struggle for economic survival ends. So, as a nation, we became very creative. All these people started coming up with newer ideas, and we started creating inventions. So if you look at the number of inventions from World War II till about 75, America beats every other nation, leaves them into dust. But then came the Reagan era. That's where we turned the clock backwards. We changed our national thinking and policy. Instead of benevolence being our national value, our national value became greed. Greed and consumption became the two hallmarks of our society. And in that greed, if you see, every good idea started to get corrupted. You start to see the fine print on your credit card. These big corporations, they had no shame in cheating you after that time. Slowly it built up into it. The student loan idea got corrupted. Even the housing idea. But that's where another thing that happened. When as a nation, we put everybody onto consumption, and greed became our national motto. Our national policy allowed some people to become very rich. And that race to be the richest guy made America a country where shameless profiteering was okay. It was okay to cheat people or do whatever to make profit. In that, all this middle class, those who were doing the manual labor, corporations started taking them hostage. And this is the classic story of one of those. All these taxi drivers, the shuttle drivers, and the van drivers, they were all employees, one form or another contract. And at that time, government introduced the workers' compensation law. I think in the late 80s, government passed a workers' comp law where every employer had to get a workers' comp insurance for every employee, or more or less for every employee. There may be some exceptions with smaller companies, but more or less everybody was trying to save that cost. I was myself managing a furniture factory at that time, and I remember our owner trying to lease the employees from a very large corporation which actually made nothing. So people came up with different ideas of trying to save this new insurance cost. And these taxi drivers and the van drivers and shuttle drivers, all these guys had no workers' comp, and the owner, somehow I know the guy who was the inventor of this idea, came up with this idea that what if we turn them into independent contractors? Then we don't have to buy insurance for them. So that was the beginning of what we are going through today. They made every employee pretty much sign a contract to be either an independent contractor or a co-op member or a franchisee. And this was done more or less at a gunpoint. What I mean by gunpoint is, when you tell an employee, if you don't sign this document, you don't have a job. It's no different than putting a gun to somebody's head. These guys were not business people. They were not making a business deal. They had no idea what business. They were simple employees. And overnight, they were turned into either an independent contractor, a franchisee, or a co-op member. And their contracts were front-loaded with all the profit or all the cost. So, in other words, all these contracts work like this, that you owe so much money to the company when the week starts. And I've been a taxi driver in United Checker Cab. I've been a prime time independent contractor, and I've been a franchisee with Super Shuttle. All these major companies have identical contracts. So you have no choice but to work 60 to 80 hours to meet up the money you owe at the beginning of the week. And then when you work that many hours, you want to make some money for yourself, so you end up working 100 to 120 hours. I know Super Shuttle has tried to challenge my assertion in their letter, and their letter is on my website. You can read it for yourself. But their assertion is wrong. We have no choice but to work that many hours. Now, you compare the same thing with the smaller companies like Carmel and so on. They don't have such clauses. They work more or less on a 60-40. Even Super Shuttle, in their express deal, the new system that the new company that they bought from somebody, they have a 60-40 deal. In other words, whatever you make, you keep 60%, company takes 40%. That way, you don't have to kill yourself to pay the company. This was the middle class. These drivers were making 60, 80,000, 100,000, 120,000. They were buying houses, they were sending children to school, they were, creating things, they were opening other businesses. And then what happened? In these major companies, big companies, they have become corporate slaves. This is one big segment of your middle class that's gone. I don't think they can raise their head again. I mean, these things are legal, but are they human? Are they benevolent in nature? I doubt it. So I am doing my best to empower ex-middle class. That's why this company, From Nobody to Somebody, where I take people, I take your ideas and convert them into business or a product or a viable cause. The video that you saw, which is Super Shuttle's Corporate Slaves, was one of my students in this class. All the inventions that you see, the software, the printer caddy, the Nextel caddy, all these ideas came from this class. And if you have an idea, please remember, ideas are nature's gift to you. It's nature's way of propelling you to your intended destiny. And if you give up on the idea simply because you don't know how to do it, or you are lazy, or you don't have the money, or your resources, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's like you're not a very wise guy. By giving away those ideas, you are choosing to accept all the hardships of life, but none of the reward. Don't make this mistake. If you have an idea, come to us, we will make it happen. Thank you very much.